welcome to another great panel we have assembled here today. This is Experiencing the Future Before We Build It. AR, VR in construction, architecture, urban planning, and beyond. And we have a great group of panelists here who are all experts in their field and have been thinking about the space for a fair amount of time. So one of our first forays into the virtual world here at the Harvard Innovation Labs was with a virtual tour of the recently built Harvard Life Lab that you may have seen sprouted out in the parking lot out back. It wasn't here this summer. There's a hole in the ground, and now we have a Life Lab. We'll be opening it in a few weeks. Prior to its construction, our designer Shepley Bulfinch built a VR tour of the space that we used to let potential occupants, companies, and students who were thinking about joining the Life Lab feel what the Life Lab would be like once it was open. This use by architects, this kind of introduced us to one of the first uses, and we've done a lot more since then. This use by architects, real estate firms, construction companies, and more, by city planners as well, is one of the most obvious use cases of AR, VR technologies. We're lucky to be joined today by a trio who can talk to all the ways that AR and VR and mixed reality are being used in these spaces. Ricardo Alvarez is a researcher at MIT who is interested in the integration of real and synthetic spaces to the use of VR, AR technologies to design new types of human experiences. Jeff Jacobson, PhD, has developed educational virtual reality and mixed reality companies for more than 20 years and is a key figure in the Boston, Cambridge VR, AR, MR community. Through his new company, Construction VR, Dr. Jacobson offers consulting, training, and project management in virtual and augmented reality in the architecture, engineering, and construction sector. I'll get into what you're doing this evening. You have a busy day today. He's going to be heading over to run the Boston VR meetup later on this evening at Mass Challenge. I can give you some more information on that once we're done. Michael Schroeder, correct? Joined the architecture firm SGA as the director of virtual design and construction services in 2014. Prior to joining SGA, Michael served as a president of a strategic architectural consulting firm working with contractors, architecture, and engineering firms to incorporate building information modeling, BIM, and VDC into their processes. So before we kind of dive into some questions that are going to kind of push the boundaries of how the boundaries are being pushed in the space, I first want to let you all kind of introduce yourself and talk about what drew you to the space and what you're doing currently in the kind of AR, VR space as it applies to these industries.
Hi, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. What brought me into this space? Mainly, I'm a video game geek, and I've been a video game geek for 37, almost 40 years. So I started, playing with games early on, and when VR technology started coming about in the early 90s, which were very crude, hefty, and such, I just wanted to test them out, and basically never stopped. Right. So over time in my professional career, I sort of veered into urban development, which is where I'm doing my PhD on that. And to me, it's kind of a natural marriage. So I'm one of the people at MIT who's looking into this actively, just trying to figure out not just what it means, but what it can become. And it's very exciting.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending. My background is in architecture, so I've always followed how people might interpret and understand architecture. Computers have helped quite considerably at some level. They've also sort of divided architecture profession process from what lay people understand architects do and how to perceive space. So three-dimensional walkthroughs and and two-dimensional renderings have helped, but when you see VR, virtual reality, and even mixed reality, there's so much more that clients can understand about the design instantly. We'll talk about the cognitive reasons behind that, but it's very natural for architecture, natural fit. So that's where my interest is. I have a little bit of a background in software engineering as well, and so we're developing new approaches to software to solve some of these issues with the bridging the gap between what architects can do and what clients understand.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Jacobson. I've been involved in virtual reality since 1991, when it was big and clunky and had just gotten popular. I'm kind of a recovering academic. My my doctorate's in information science. That's the engineering and philosophy of information in the mind and the environment and in the computer, with a focus on learning with virtual reality. And in the last 2, 3 years, I saw the Oculus Rift came out, and figured everything was going to change. So now I'm doing consulting, helping people do VR, helping to organize the Boston VR meetup, and I've gotten into the construction industry and working with architects because they have a lot of very interesting puzzles they're working on, and they are just now adopting VR technology. It's a perfect fit and a very interesting playground.
So, first thing I'm going to ask is, what are the most interesting use cases you've had? You've seen or that you've applied using this technology in the space. So, Jeff, who is using this technology best, and how have they used it in construction or architecture?
Well, the the first and most obvious use case, and Michael can speak to that, is creating a 3D sketch so that the architect can show the client what the building is going to be like, and this can be high finish, it can be an early sketch, but also the architects themselves and the engineers can look at a visualization, and for the same reason that they build scale models or do drawings, guys like Michael have an amazing visual imagination. But when you create a representation that's outside of yourself, in view of your eye, you're offloading it from your brain, your forebrain, and you're activating your visual cortex. So you can see the VR, and that frees you to do more.
Yeah, I'll add to that. When our clients look at even a great two-dimensional rendering, they're still looking through a window. But when they put on the VR, they're there, and I think that's what you meant, or that's what's happening. Was what you said. They're able to immediately understand the space and critique the space in ways that are really helpful for design professionals. The feedback is amazing. And we use that. Once we get over the aha moment and the giant smiles and laughter, we start getting into the architecture, and that's when the magic happens. That's when people really, this is my space. Oh my goodness, I had no idea it was going to look like this, and they're really immersed. Now that feeling, it transports them to the space rather than looking through a window, and it's a completely different feedback that we see from our clients.
When you show people drawings, plans, renderings, you're asking them to put it all together in their head, and nobody's going to do that the same way. Some people can't do it at all. This creates agreement on what.
This is a very common problem. We can we can see the technologies primarily as a communication device. We're bridging a communication that is technical in nature. Hence, we have professional architects into people who are not professional, but that doesn't mean that they don't have design interests. So the first step is kind of communication, right? You wow them. Now they understand scale. Now they understand volume, which most people are not really good at gauging volume and scale. What is interesting is not just for visualizing purposes, but actually for prototyping. And as you say, how early in the stage you can start bringing in your customers, informing them on the decisions of design and the rationale behind those decisions, as well as some of the consequences of design. And it's a different process of communication when you do that using an abstract language, where just by decodifying that abstract language, you lose a lot. As when you're using a very immediate language that's brought by the nature of the medium. So that the dynamic, if you want, architect client kind of changes a little bit. And to a certain extent, when you project the the tools that are used to create virtual worlds are tools that actually have it's not necessarily the same workflow as the traditional tools used by architects. So embedded in those tools are actually possibilities for engaging with the clients in different ways. And now you're talking about reshaping the design process, which is really exciting.
And so that interactivity, it's on a large scale with urban planning. It's on a small scale with construction and architecture. I mean, so what are you doing? What is what are you doing for clients, and how are you approaching that? Like, what is most important as you build out these worlds, do you think? Maybe you can answer that first, and then we can move on.
Yeah.
No, Michael, do you
Yeah.
sorry.
So what are we building? So we, initially the no-brainer is we obviously will build a visualization, an immersive experience right off the bat so that we can get good understanding and buy-in of the design concepts and advance the design process in a way that is consistent with the views of the client. That is often one of the biggest challenges, because once concrete is poured, it becomes very expensive to move that. And so we can move bits and atoms, bits much easier than atoms. So focusing on moving those bits and making people understand their decisions solidly is incredibly important. So we do that. That's obvious. The next step is our own designers to do quick VR experiences and understand it themselves. You'd be surprised at how long it takes for designers to even understand plans and sections, elevations spatially. It's something that's not often intuitive to architects and designers either. So it takes time. We push our teams to learn that, to assist their own process. And then finally, we do a lot of research and development to reach across different disciplines. I focus a lot on construction. So how do we get our construction teams understanding what we're trying to build? And we do that mostly with looking at augmented reality to do that.
I have a new client. It's a construction company, and they have this integration problem where they get the basic design from the architect, the structural design, and then they have these different engineers designing the subsystems of the building. The electricians design the electrical system. The HVAC people design the airflow system. The plumbers, the list goes on, right? So you've got all these subsystems designed, and then it's the construction company that has to actually put it together and make it work, which is just a brain-cracking problem. They call it the six-sided box, when they're talking about bringing these systems together in a room. And sure enough, things are going to cross over other things, so designs have to change. And VR helps them see it, helps them do it.
And I think that when it comes to cities, you got to add a few layers of additional complexity, right? Cities are inherently social processes, so you bring in a lot of stakeholders that have different opinions and interests. From the get-go, as a communication device, it serves very well a purpose of kind of putting everybody in the same channel. Okay, now we understand that there's a less misinformation going around a group. What it's interesting is how can you extract information from the users that also inform the design and inform the decision. So, for example, you can project a design plan and have users just walk around, see if they understand it. So it's essentially running telemetry to see if they're moving to where you want them to move. You can give them voting tools, okay? See what is it that they're observing, if they don't like something. You can give them some tools for, fast design and prototyping, okay? So they can start morphing the design. And if you pair that up with, for example, content management systems, then you start seeing a whole set of dynamics of design that are really interesting, right? You can have people upload their designs, which essentially gives you a sort of catalog on, I'm going to call it the will of the people over time. You can have multi-user sessions who simultaneously are co-designing. And it's not so much just bringing the input of their wishes into the design process, but it also serves to democratize the whole flow. which is very important.
So in terms of kind of, you've all been in the space for enough time to see changes. So, how has the space evolved in its greatest form? I think, what are some of the large evolutions you've seen of the use of these technologies? And then do you see it going next quickly? Maybe Jeff, do you have it?
It relates to construction architecture. Over the last 20, 25 years, us VR people have been just after the architects and after the construction people saying, you got to try this, you got to try, come on. And it only ever got tried for these really big, really expensive projects because the VR was so expensive. And, it was usually a big showcase event and some interesting things were learned, but it never really went anywhere. Then suddenly what's happening now with pretty good VR gear cheaply available, we're in the early adopter phase where companies like SGA, they're picking up the technology, they're learning it themselves and applying it to their problems. Then there's going to be this little sort of settling in phase where the early adopters get good at it and the rest continue to wait, and then it'll hockey stick upward, to mass adoption through the industry. But I don't know. I'm thinking it might take a good 5 to 10 years before it's really fully integrated into your workflow.
Yeah, I would say that the price of the gears come down so much, especially for professionals. Consumer, it might still be somewhat expensive. But we're seeing some more high-end, very high-end VR devices, high-resolution VR displays, just targeting professionals. These will become in the market in the next 6 to 10 months. I think we're going to see a shift towards augmented reality as that becomes a price point in certain two big companies, both Microsoft and Magic Leap's devices become more broadly available. We've done some dabbling in Microsoft's HoloLens. Developed an application. I think there's one over there, right? You're at their Holo Hackathon. We a small team of us of 3. We developed a little app in 44 hours where we developed facility managers could walk through a space, look like this, and say, "Show me the water supply pipe," and the ceiling basically disappears as it's augmentedly overlaid with all of the systems, and it highlights that pipe, and then you can say, "Take me to that shutoff valve," and a virtual object appears in front of you and directs you exactly right through the building to where to go to turn off the valve. Now, that's a lot more intuitive and natural, seemingly to me, than looking at opening up a drawer, pulling out plans, looking at different systems and trying to figure out what's happening with paper. So, and that's what happens today, believe it or not. They still look at paper.
I think we need to understand the evolution of the technology. I agree with Jeff in the sense that the technology has come down in price very, very fast while increasing the capabilities very, very fast. But we also have to recognize that the technology is still at a very early stage. And there are things that are being worked at right now, anywhere from, photogrammetry, videogrammetry to, wireless transmission of data. And if we project not necessarily the form of, let's say, a VR system or an AR system as we're consuming them today, but actually imagining them how they're going to be technologically feasible, not in a long span of time, in 5, 10, 15 years, then it's interesting because from there we can imagine the dynamics, okay, by which we use them. I think that the technology side is going to come earlier. The integration of the design and production pipelines and workflows, that's going to take a little bit longer. And the evolution of the school system and the education system to actually start training new generations of architects into thinking, with this mindset, that's going to take a little bit longer, right? So we're going to see a period of time where it's going to be a little bit like the Wild West. There's going to be, a lot of players just trying to imagine ultimately what is the proper language of design, use, and interaction of the tool. And that is very exciting because a lot of the things that we are seeing is that it's a very different language when you move from VR to AR. It's a very different language when you move from a full presential three-dimensional reality to a flat screen, which is how we normally consume the information for design, right? So that there's a humongous space, tremendous space. But I agree with you in the sense that it is practically inevitable. It is a better tool that brings a lot of benefits to the table. So it's not just a matter of how it's going to take form, but ultimately how fast it will become the norm.
Yeah.
I'd like to say virtual reality is old and new at the same time. The modern VR was invented by the military aerospace people back in the 70s with their flight simulators. And between then and now, there were decades of science behind it, working it out, making it work. And most of the people in it were computer scientists and sort of human factors experts, people experts on perception. There are very few, well, like me, who are into other areas like education. And that has made what appears to be this very rapid development of the new VR tools possible, because the Oculus, Palmer Luckey had the idea, he slapped together a prototype, but to make it work required some exquisite engineering that got done in a year or two because they had a bunch of gray heads around who knew how to make it go. But then it's very new in that suddenly millions of people have access to it. And so VRs and AR are going to get used in ways that none of us imagined.
Yeah, it was basically an old dream rekindled. VR went through the classical hype curve. And what happened is once that Luckey started showing a little bit of light at the end of a tunnel, then you started seeing people like Michael Abrash, like John Carmack, who essentially were thinking about this a long time ago and said, okay, now it's possible. So you start seeing these very fast configurations of teams of experts that are not new on the subject, okay, but they're simply now synthesizing and integrating the solutions at a really fast pace. Once you get big companies putting billions of dollars behind it, now you're looking at a feasible ecosystem. So all of this that we hear right now, it's not out of the blue. It comes out of a lot of R&D that happened for decades, paired with a point in time where the technology just makes it feasible at affordable prices, right? And now you see the kind of the tide turn.
Mm-hmm. And I think the vast amount we learned here from you this afternoon, among things, is the opportunity in these spaces in particular to kind of get in early and make a difference and learn how these technologies and this medium is going to be evolving as we move on. And I think a good way to do that also, if you really want to continue the conversation about VR, is tonight. Again, Jeff, you're hosting the VR meetup, which is going to be over at Mass Challenge at 6 to 10 at the Design Center in the Seaport. You're going to be talking about scalable display technologies?
Scalable display technologies will be presenting. They do large-scale multi-projector projections. We will also have 7 exciting new virtual reality startups who are each going to give a 5-minute lightning talk.
Yeah, so if you want to continue, there's a full day of AR and VR discussion if you want to get involved.
And lots of demos.
Yeah. And that's a great organization too, Boston VR, and there's 2 separate organizations right now, but eventually maybe there'll be one.
Oh, we just spun off Boston AR so that we could spread out and stay small enough to fit into the free venues.
Thank you very much. This is great, and I appreciate it. Thank you to the panel for sharing your insight.